Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the COBOL guy. And in this video, we're going to actually start doing some stuff with getting data from the user. Now, a disclaimer here. IBM, which was the company that pretty much made COBOL famous just because of all of its mainframes and its computer technology, IBM did not build COBOL or did not implement COBOL in such a way for very easy user input. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you think back in the day, when you sent data to a COBOL program, the user didn't type it in because we didn't even have that technology. Back then, you had to punch cards. I'm not joking. Punch cards. You had to punch those cards, and in those cards had the data. Now, let me grab a punch card here just so you can see it. I don't know if this is... yeah, the punch cards kind of looked like this. In fact, I believe this was a punch card. And what you would do is not only would the COBOL program be on punch cards, but also the data. And each punch card would contain one record or one row of data. Now, this is called the Hollerith format and of punch cards. And there were a number of different ones, but that was the most popular that IBM used. And what you would do is you would input that data into a COBOL program, which would be considered what they call a batch program. So it would take all that data and process it. As an example, let's say you have a data file out there with all of your best friends' information. Well, if you want to add 5 best friends, you wouldn't go to a terminal and just type those 5 best friends in. What you would do is you would punch up 5 of those cards, put them in a stack of JCL, job control language, which would then execute the COBOL program that would then grab the data from those cards and put it in your best friend file. And that's what they call a batch program or a batch system. And that's really what COBOL was built on. Now, with the advent of Microsoft COBOL, Micro Focus COBOL, which I believe those two were kind of the same, where Microsoft used a lot of Micro Focus's technology. And then later on, GNU COBOL, which is what we're going to use today, they've added a bunch of features, like the screen section, a very usable accept statement, which we're going to do today, as well as display, to make it more user input or user friendly, so you don't have to go off and find cards to input them to punch them on cards, punch your data on cards, and then run it through a program. Now, the IBM COBOL compiler for x86-64 Linux, which is the one you might have seen in some of these videos, that language doesn't even implement the screen section. It does implement accept, but it's mainly an accept used for a computer operator to answer a question like, I had this problem, should I continue? Or, not really non-floating point, non-numeric data. And that's really what the accept statement is for on IBM COBOL. And I really wish they would open up a little bit and add these new features. But I think IBM is still concentrated on the mainframe. And oh, by the way, I do have a mainframe playlist now. So you might want to go take a look at Bill Sky, the mainframe guy, and you can get your hands on a mainframe for absolutely free if you go and take a look at that. So what we're going to do is we're going to play around with accept, we're going to play around with the screen section. I'm going to introduce you to those. We might be able to do some pretty sophisticated stuff here, but I think you're going to find it really interesting because COBOL has, especially GNU COBOL and Micro Focus COBOL, have really, really awesome implementations of the screen section to allow you to actually create a graphical user interface that's not graphical, that's basically text-based. And it really makes coding very, very simple to get user input. So let's get going. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to do some really simple accept and display. So I'm going to go and create a new project. And I'm just going to call this project Accept Practice. And let's go in there and actually do some work. So here's my template. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable in my working storage section. And if you don't know what the working storage section is, I recommend that you take a look at some of my earlier videos on COBOL to show you how to define data and make it available. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a working storage section entry here, and I'm going to call this one input float. And I'm going to make it a pick 94.99. So I can have 2 decimal points. and I'll just make it a value of 0. Okay, now if you remember, a pic S94.99, that's a display data type. So that would be kind of like usage is display. And what that means is that it means that the data is not really calculable, or the variable is not really calculable. It's mainly just for output to the screen. So we're just going to leave it like that, because usage is display is default. Okay, so we have that data there. Let's go ahead and display something. So I'm going to say display. What do I say? Please enter a floating point number. And I would like you to be able to enter it on the same line as the display. So I'm going to say with no advancing. And then here's the first time we've messed around with accept. I'm going to say accept input float. Now, one thing to remember is that if we had a comp 1 or a comp 2 or a comp 3, well, actually comp 1 or comp 2, and you say accept input float, depending upon the compiler, it may not even compile because you're trying to enter ASCII data into a floating point number, which may be IEEE formatted in memory. So in fact, the IBM compiler will actually show you that you may not get the results that you wish. So whenever you're inputting data, it's always a good idea to input it into a pic variable. Okay, so let's just go ahead and save and build that. And I'm going to go to my terminal, set path from document, and I'm going to run it. Whoop. Okay, please enter a floating point number, 123.45. Okay, great, it worked. Now, one thing I do want to show you is I don't remember in my other videos if we did with no advancing, but let's delete that just so you can see what'll happen. And let's run it. And you can see how the cursor is now on the bottom. So that's what with no advancing does. And I really like with no advancing, so I always like to have that in there. Okay, so the data is there. Now let's go ahead and let's say display you entered input float. And even though uppercase and lowercase doesn't matter, I always like to put it in there, right? Okay, so I didn't put it, oh, I typed something in, I put input float. Okay, so input float. Spell it right. I was so worried about capitalization. Okay, there we go. Let's go ahead and run it. Okay, 123.45. So you might look at this and say, well, why is it 0123.45? Well, that's because it's a pic 9. What we could have done is we could have said Z3, which is 0 suppress, and then 19. So you can do that. So let's try it now. And now it looks better. Now that 0 isn't there. However, there is a space there because that's what 0 suppress does. Now let's go ahead and multiply that by some number. I'm going to multiply it by, I don't know, what do we want to multiply it by? 10.22. So I'm going to say multiply input float by 10.22 giving input float. And let's see what we get. I believe we're going to get a compiler error, which we did. So it says input float is not a numeric value. Input float really isn't. Even though it has a pic of numeric values, these are displayed. These are ASCII characters. So you really can't multiply that. You can't do any numeric calculations. And I mentioned this in my last video on display data types. So what we need to do is we need to create another, and let's call this working float. And I'm going to say pic. Oh, I'm not going to say pic. I'm going to say usage is comp 1. And that's a floating point. So that's a single precision floating point. A comp 2 would be double precision. So let's make that a comp 2. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and say move 100.22 to working float. And then instead of 10.22, I'm going to say working float. So let's build that. I believe we are still going to get an error because input float is still not a, like I said, it's not a calculable number. So I'm going to create another one called final float, and I'm going to say usage is comp2, And before I do the multiplication, I'm going to move input float to final float. Then we put 100.22 in a working float. What I could have done here is I could have said value 100.22. And let's get everything lined up nice. And instead of saying multiply input float, because we copied input float into final float, we're going to say final float. And we're going to say giving final float. Now, I don't believe you need the giving in there, but, you know, it's something that I've always done. All right, great. So let's see what actually happens. I'm going to go into terminal, and I'm going to main it, run the main. Okay, so let's just put in 100. Okay, well, it says you entered 100, but it did the multiplication. Oh, we forgot to display it. So I'm going to say display your number multiplied by 100.22 has a value of final float. All right, let's see if that works. Okay, 123.45. All right, this is looking a lot better. So your number multiplied by 100.22 has a value of 12372.159. So that is simply using accept and display to grab data from the user. Now you can also do this with a alphanumeric or an alphabetic. So I'm going to create another one, full name, and I'm just going to say pick x32, and down here I'm going to say display, please enter your name with no advancing, and I'm going to say accept full name. All right, so then I'm going to say display, thank you so much for running me, and say full name. So even with alphanumeric, you can do that. Now I like to show the numeric first because there's a little bit of things you have to do. Now, again, for you C and C++ programmers, maybe more C++, for you Java programmers, Python programmers especially, this all seems to be a pain in the neck. Well, you have to remember that back when COBOL was first developed, they didn't have the idea of any kind of data. They just had integer, floating point, and character, and never the twain should meet. So they had to, you have to jump around some hoops a little bit. Now on IBM COBOL, this really does not work very well. I've tried it because really IBM COBOL is not meant to be, mainframe COBOL is not meant to be a user interface type of a language. However, CICS, which I may be able to talk about later on, but CICS is a user interface structure that is available. And if you want more information than that, just take a look at CICS, and that will give you more of a user interface environment. Okay, so let's go ahead and make this, and let's run it. Bill Sky, computer guy. And there you go. So it works out great. So again, the accepted display are fully implemented on GNU COBOL, Microsoft COBOL, which is really old, back in the 80s, and also Microfocus COBOL, which, by the way, if you're interested in that, they do have a trial. It's either 60 days or a year. I can't get them to tell me what it is. And it is usable on Windows. It's got a really nice integrated development environment, but it does cost money if you want to use it later on. So I'm sure most of you like free stuff, so that's why we're using GNU COBOL. And GNU COBOL implements this very nicely as well. Okay, so that's accept. Okay, so let's go ahead and start a new project, and you're going to see why. It's a really good idea to start a new project here. So I'm going to just create another project, and I'm going to call this, I don't know, let's call this screen section practice. And let's write some code. Okay, so a little bit before we get into this, what is the screen section? If you take a look down here on lines 25 and 26, I've got two sections that are commented out, the screen section and the report section. The screen section and the report section are a way for you to format your data before you ever send it to the output device. The report section is basically like the print section, where it says, what do you actually want to have printed? The screen section is, what do you want to show on the screen? And as I said in the introduction of this video, IBM COBOL doesn't really have this because IBM COBOL is really meant for mainframes, and they use the CICS, the Customer Information System, to actually do this user input and output. It's another product you have to buy. Well, I'm not sure if you have to buy it, but it actually is available for you. But to implement that on a workstation or on a PC or a Mac or Windows or Linux is just a nightmare. Well, this is what's cool, is that Micro Focus COBOL and what we're going to be using here, GNU COBOL, they actually have that implemented. And I want to raise a hand and clap to the GNU developers, the GNU COBOL developer, because they've really implemented a really nice screen section. So we're going to play around with screen section. I am going to do another video on the report section, but for right now we're going to do the screen section. And I'm going to just comment that out, that section out. And I'm going to save it, and I'm going to build it. But I'm going to go up here to build. I'm going to say make custom target. I'm going to type IBM. Oh, it should have been lowercase IBM. And we get an error in the IBM COBOL. It doesn't know what this is. Even if I do move it into area A, like let's say if I move this over to there, let's go ahead and build it again using the IBM COBOL. Yeah, it isn't going to let me do it. It isn't going to let me. Let's move it over a little bit. And IBM COBOL is really, really strict on where you put stuff. And so there it goes. So, but nothing in here will actually be implemented on the IBM COBOL. It doesn't actually give you an error message, but it does tell you, or it won't do it. If I go into here and I say main, it says hello world. But if I start putting some stuff in the screen section, it's going to have a problem. So let's go ahead and do this as if it's a GNU COBOL. And then what we'll do is we will then try to compile it in IBM COBOL, and we actually have something in there to view, and we can, and I can show you how the IBM COBOL compiler will actually kill our hopes. All right, so let's go ahead and create something really, really simple. All I want to do is just have a nice little screen that has a title on it. And it's kind of neat how this works. So up here in the screen section, it's just like the working storage section. I'm going to specify 01, and I'm going to call this data entry screen. And I could put dashes in here. That might be better. Data-entry screen. And let's move it over a little bit. Okay. And below that, I'm going to say 05 title line. And now what you do is you specify where on the screen you want to display it. So I'm going to say line 1, I don't know, column 35. And I'm going to give it a value. Value. Having trouble with my fingers this morning. Data entry screen. Okay, let's go ahead and build that. We're just going to do a normal build. Okay, we have a little bit of a problem here on line 28. Let's see, what did I do wrong? 05 title line. I think it might be because I didn't specify a continuation character. Let's see if that fixes it. Yeah, it's not letting me do that for some reason. Okay, well, let's take a look. What did I do wrong? Let's take a look at my notes over here. So I have 05 title line. Let's move these over so we can have... Oh, there it is right there. I forgot to put a space there. Oops. Silly me. And there we go. So let's go ahead and run it. And it just says hello world. So all we've done is we've defined what we want to display on the screen, but we actually haven't done it yet. Now I'm going to go ahead and build this using IBM. And we get a number of different errors. The first error is that I'm not in area A, so let's move the screen section over. and it let me do it on IBM COBOL. Nope, that's COBC. Let's go ahead and make custom target. Yeah, we have a problem here. Again, O1 should begin in area A. Again, IBM is really stickler about that. Let's see if that does it. Okay. Yeah, now it says screen should not be in area A. So yeah, it's kind of a pain in the neck. And the reason why IBM does that is because they want it to be compatible with mainframe COBOL. So if you look at my earlier videos where I talk about area A, area B, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about there. But we're going to stick with GNU COBOL. You can see it's a little more difficult. And actually, I kind of like my data to be more aligned over to the left. So, all right. So now how do we display that? Well, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to say display data entry screen. And let's see what happens. And now I'm going to run this on an actual terminal. I'm not going to run it in the Genie terminal. So I'm going to open up a terminal here. And I'm going to say /main. Okay, so there's our data entry screen. And GNU COBOL is printed end of program, please press a key to exit. So we have a screen that is still in control of the COBOL program. Okay, that's interesting. Let's do something, I don't know, let's do something else interesting here. I'm going to say 05 name entry line. Let's make this line 3 column 20. And let's say value enter your name. Let's try to stay with mainframe the way the mainframe looks. Okay, let's go ahead and save and build that. Let's run it. Okay, that's pretty neat. So now we've got the title, we've got enter your name, but we're still not entering any data. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's enter some data. So I'm going to say 05. Let's not call it name entry. Let's call it name text. And let's call this one name entry. And we're going to say pick X32. We're going to make this line 3 column. Now we need to specify what the column number should be. So this is 20 to 139. So let's make it 40 and let's put a space here. So column 40. Now I'll show you how you can get away with that. Okay, so let's build it. Let's run it. Okay, it didn't really do anything because we never did an accept. So now let's go down here, and after we display it, let's say accept data entry screen. All right, let's make sure we spell it right. Okay, it worked. Now let's see what happens. Well, why didn't it, I accepted the data entry screen, but why didn't it let me, it's not letting me type any data in. Well, here's the thing, is that every piece of data that you are going to input from the screen, you have to associate it with a working storage variable. So I'm going to say using WS, and I always like to say WS for working storage, name entry. So that means up here we have to say WS name entry. And we're going to call this a pick. It's always a good idea to make it the same size. I'm going to say value spaces. All right, let's try it again. Enter your name. So now we actually have a blinking cursor. And if you see here, the 32 bytes, 32 characters is actually highlighted. So I'm going to say Bill Sky the assembly guy. All right, that's pretty neat. It didn't do anything, but you know, let's see what happens. So we've got the data entry screen, and so what I'm going to say is I'm going to say display goodbye work storage, name entry. So we're going to actually grab the data the user typed in and display it. And it displayed it right there. Now, we do have some issues here. It's not looking quite right because it displayed it, but you know, it didn't do exactly what we wanted it to do. And that's mainly because you don't mix the screen section and simple displays that would display on the terminal. It's not a good idea to do that. So actually, let's play around with that a little bit. So we don't want to just display it on the screen on the terminal using this because you saw that it was kind of weird. So let's go ahead and create another data entry area, and I'm going to call this name display. I'm going to call it pixx. Let's make it 34, and let's make this line 20 column. Oh, let's make this all the same. Column. I don't know. Let's make a column 20. Why not? Let's put something in front of this. Let's say line 20, column 2, value. Okay. Let's go ahead and save and build that. Okay, so we have a problem here on line 37, name display, pick x34, line 20, column 20. What did I do wrong? Unexpected identifier, expected leading or trailing. Did I forget a period? I think I forgot a period. There we go. All right, let's run it. Okay, so this is kind of neat. So we've got our status down here. We've got our enter your name. It doesn't do anything. Okay, and I want to get rid of this goodbye. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so let's go ahead and put that data. Let's go ahead and put whatever the user typed in into the status area, into the name display. So I'm going to say move 77 ws name entry to name display. I'm going to say display data entry screen. Let's see how this works. All right, that's kind of neat. It displayed Bill down here in the status area, but then it also ended the program. So what if we just want to keep the program going? What if we don't want the program to ever end? Well, this is where we're going to get into something kind of interesting. We're going to create a loop inside of the COBOL program, and we're just going to say perform this code until. So we want to put this in a loop. We don't want the program to end right away. We just want to have them enter in data. Keep entering in data until they type something. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say perform, I don't know, until, well, we don't really have a value. Perform until ws name entry equals to, let's just say, quit, Q, or QUIT. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and indent all of this. Now, because we've got a data entry screen here, or display data entry screen here and a display there, I don't need that one anymore. And then to end the loop, I'm going to say end perform, I believe. And you don't put a period. I'm going to get into performs later on in these videos, but I'm going to get rid of all of these periods because the periods say that I'm done. And really, a perform is just a single line that has all the lines inside of it right next to it. It just keeps going, and you don't want to have a period except for the very last end perform. So again, if you're a little bit lost on that, that's okay. I'll get to that in an upcoming video. All right, enter your name, Bill. All right, cool. Let's change it to Susan. All right, Clive, Terry. Pretty neat, right? And I'm going to put in, I can press delete. I'm going to put in a Q. And what didn't work? I was supposed to put in quit. There we go. So I actually had to look at the program code to figure that out. So we actually have an issue here. So let's go here and say enter your name. And let's keep track of how many characters that we are actually counting here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, no, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So 14. So why am I keeping track of that? Because the name entry has to now go into there. So we have to change the column. And let's go back a little bit because it's getting pretty long. So let's just make this 10 and then let's make this 44 and see how it looks. Okay, that's kind of neat. I'd like the cursor one over to the right, so I'm going to change that to 45 instead of 44. And let's make sure it still works. All right, great, still works. Okay, so let's make this 45. What's neat about this is that I'm not doing it in the actual logic, I'm doing it in the screen section. Okay, great. And now let's see what we got here. This is the problem when you don't have a design, right? Okay, that seems to work. All right. Let's build it, make sure we have that space there. Ah, much better. All right, great. All right, wonderful. What about entering numbers? Well, let's go ahead and do some of that. Now, before we do that, I want to test one thing. I'm going to press the Tab key, and if you notice, when I press the Tab key, it doesn't go anywhere. We have a field here under Status. You can see this name display, but the reason why going Tab doesn't take you to that field is that we don't have a using clause for that name display. If I had a using clause, let's go ahead and say using WS name display, and let's go ahead and create that up here. And let's run it again. Notice now that the status down below has a line and I can tab to it. Well, if you're never going to be using that for user input, like a status, you normally wouldn't use it for input, don't have a using name display. Just put your data directly into that screen section variable. So this could be confusing. The user might say, well, yeah, see, it's just not working right. So if you're not going to be using that data for user input, just go ahead and just leave it in the screen section and don't do anything in the working storage section. Don't put a using in there. Okay, let's do something else kind of interesting. I'm going to go here and I'm going to put in some data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it from some other data I have over here, or from another screen section I have. Oh, let's just type it in. Let's make this line 3. Oh, let's not make a line 3. Let's make it line 4, column, I don't know, 10. And let's say value. Enter a value here. Let's create another one. Let's say entry value label 1, entry value label 2. Okay. And now we actually want to grab the data. So let's go ahead and create another one. Call this one entry value. We're going to say line 4, column, let's just say 30 for now. And we're going to say, let's give it a value so they can type in 999, or let's say 94.99. And we're going to say using working storage entry value 1, which we haven't defined yet. That's fine. And there's entry value 2. Okay. And that's using entry value 2. All right, so we have to put those in there now. So 77 WS entry value 1. Usage is comp 2. 77 WS entry value 2. Usage is comp 2. And let's build it, see if we have any compiler errors. I'm sure we do. Yep. So line 39, entry value. Oh, I got a period. Oh, the period's okay there. So line 4 comment using WS entry value 1. I think I might have typed that in wrong. Nope, it looks good. All right, what did I mess up on? Syntax error, unexpected, but expected. Oh, forgot the pick. By the way, this is one good reason why it's a good idea to design your screens before you actually start coding, because it just isn't as nice. Okay, and we still have a problem on line 38. Oh, we forgot a period. We forgot a period. Let's see if that fixes it. Okay, line 39, we still have a problem. Should have 1 9 there, not 2. There we go. Now let's run it. Okay, so we've got enter value here. We've got our name. Let's quit. We don't see the enter value 2. And the reason is that we didn't go to the next line here. So I'm going to say 4. Actually, change that to 5. Ah, there's our 2 values. I'd like a space in between there after the equal sign. I'd like to get rid of that space. Also, it looks like don't have the equals greater than. So it looks like we're not at the right place. So let's go ahead and quit out of that. And instead of 30, let's make this 35. Ah, much better. Okay. So Bill Sky, and I can put in data. Now, because of the picture, I can only put in certain types of data. Like I can't put A, B, C, D. I can't put in any strange characters. I can only put in numbers because it's a pick 9. I can put it a decimal point. So I'll put in 1000.22. Oops, what happened here? 1000.22, 2001.30, or let's say 44. I'm just going to press enter. And it shows Bill Sky. It hasn't really done anything. I need to remember to move this status over here to the left a little bit. Okay, so what are we doing? I'm going to create a little calculator. I'm going to say quit. And now let's go ahead and put a sum. So I'm going to call this sum label. And we're going to make this line 7, column 10, the summed value. And let's go ahead and put another one here, summed value, line 7, column, let's say 35. Let's give it a pick. Let's save and build this, make sure it looks okay. Okay, it looks pretty good. We can't tab to the summed value. because it isn't using a working storage value. Now there is a problem with that, is that if you actually want to use that later on, you might have some trouble. But okay, that's good. Let's just put a 1 there, a 2, press enter. Nothing's really happening. That's okay. Now let's go ahead and quit. And let's do the sum. So after the user types it in, I'm going to move WS name entry to name display. I want to add those two things together and put them into the sum value. So let's see what we got here. We got WS entry 1. Okay, let's create another one. WS total value. Usage is comp 2. WS total value. So I'm going to say add WS entry value 1 to WS entry value 2, giving WS, and what did we call it? We called it total value. Now we haven't moved that into the sum value yet, so let's say move WS total value to sum value. Let's see how that works. Okay, we have some problems. I don't have a G here. I have to say G. I also put a period at the end, so we got to get rid of that period. We've got a period here too. Problem. All right, great. Let's go ahead and run it. All right. So Bill Sky. Let's put a 1. Let's put a 2. Enter. We got 3. Let's go ahead and change this to -100. Now notice the minus didn't take when I press tab. So let's see how we'd like to put in negative numbers, right? So let's go ahead and quit out. Now how do we put in negative numbers? Well, comp 1s and comp 2s are always floating points, so they can be negative, but our pick isn't allowing us to do that. So let's put a plus there on the pick of entry level entry 1 and entry 2. Let's run it. Okay, good. So I can put a -100 and I can put a plus to 2100. Let's say 0.99. Let's go ahead and put a name in there. You're not required, and press enter, and there you go. So we added 2100.98 to -100, and we got 2098. Now I'm still have these spaces here, so let's clean this up a little bit. This is column 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, so it should be 10, not 20. Okay, let's quit. Let's save and build this. And I don't know, let's put in something interesting. And it worked. And notice our status is over where it should be. Pretty nice. It also does kind of user validation. You can't type in non-numeric values in those numeric fields. Pretty neat. So awesome. So that is the screen section. That's the accept. That's the display. I really recommend that you play around with it. We're going to be doing more with the screen section as this course moves on, because I'm going to use the screen section. You saw that we just did it with a perform. I showed you how to do a perform, a loop that kept going until the name was equal to QUIT. We're going to do that with all of the logic which are coming up. We're going to use the screen section to have the user type data. We're going to be checking it. Probably what we're going to do is we're going to be making sure they type in some valid numbers. Maybe you don't want them to type in negative, only positive. Maybe the name needs to be greater than spaces. So you're going to want to display that information to the user. So wow, good first attempt getting user input. We're going to be using this a lot. Hope to see you at our next video.